In conversation with Alexander Den Heijer. Alexander is the author of the best-selling book Nothing You Don't Already Know and its more recent book Finding What Was Never Lost. With over 180,000 followers on Instagram, Alexander has gained popularity as an author for his engaging and accessible teachings on personal and spiritual growth. As a corporate trainer and public speaker, Alexander has more than 13 years of experience with international groups on topics such as personal leadership, purpose, psychological safety, nonviolent communication, cultural change, and spiritual growth. And on today's episode of Author Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Alexander Den Haya. How are you doing, Alexander?
I'm very good. Thanks for the invite, Peter. Really happy to talk to you.
Absolutely, it's my joy, really, and I'm quite excited, really, to have you on the show today. Following your amazing, lovely works you've got there on the internet space, it's quite amazing, and I'm happy we're here to talk about it. Thanks for coming on.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah. So, Alessandra, I need to first say that I was impressed, very impressed and taken aback, reading through the description page of your book, the one titled Nothing You Don't Already Know, Remarkable Reminders About Meaning, Purpose, and Self-Realization. And I would like to ask you, how does this book come about? What inspired you to write Nothing You Don't Already Know, and even to come up with such an amazing concept for a book title name? It's quite enthralling, really.
You'll probably laugh if I tell you how I came to the title.
I would
I
love
will
to
tell
hear
I will
that.
tell you later. Let's start with how this came about.
Yeah.
Actually, I started, I think, about 10 years ago, somewhere in 2014, 15,
Oh wow.
that I just started sharing text on Instagram that inspired me. And I started writing. At the
Mm.
time, I was a trainer and public speaker, and I always tried to end my talks with a certain sentence that could really grasp the essence of something. And at some point, I just started sharing these texts online, and they went viral quite quickly. And after I think a year or so sharing text on Instagram, someone once commented under one of my posts, like, "Hey, Alex, I really like your post. If you make a book out of it, I would buy it."
Wow.
And that inspired me to think about it. Hey, maybe it's nice for my followers on Instagram to bundle these thoughts, put them together, and make a little book out of it.
Hmm.
And that's what I decided to do. I was quite interesting about it is that at some point what I did, I printed all my posts with the quotes that I shared and put them in my living room. And then I was like, okay, a book needs chapters. So now what? How do I make some structure out of this? And I'm very bad with structures. I have a very chaotic, creative mind, but structure is not my strength.
Hmm.
So what happened? I couldn't decide. I was looking at what are the main themes here in my book, or in my text, and I saw a lot on personal growth. And I was like, if I make one chapter personal growth, that's like there's a lot in there. But then we have small other chapters. I couldn't make up my mind. So what happened? I decided to let it go. The next day, I was on my bicycle. I remember very clearly here in
Hmm.
Amsterdam, and I realized that it let me go in some way. This because I kept thinking about it. How do I make chapters? And then I got an intuition, like, hey, Alex, go to a coffee corner, get a coffee. And I saw this coffee place right in front of me, and I decided to go there. I met a man. I started talking with him. It
Hmm.
turned out that he was an author.
Oh
He
wow.
published a book on spiritual awakening, and he said, "Oh, wait, I have a copy with me." So he gave it to me. He said, "You can have it for inspiration." I opened up his book, and what I saw is that he put his own personal journey of spiritual awakening into chapters as a process. And immediately it clicked in my mind. I was like, wait a minute, if I would go back to my texts,
Wow.
probably I see my own process
Hmm.
underlying there. So I went home, I gave him a high five. I could keep the book, we exchanged numbers. And I
Wow.
went home, and from the top of my head, I just wrote about my own process in kind of 7 chapters. And I went back to the text that I had all printed, and they fit in perfectly in all those chapters. And all of a sudden I was like, hey, I got chapters now. And that's how it kind of started growing. And then, of course, I had to do a lot of rewriting. I had to do a lot of editing, but I got an editor, fortunately. And then I came to the book. And to come back on the title, I remember having a drink in a bar with a friend. And I said, my book needs a title, but it's such a difficult thing. And he
Yeah.
said to me, you know what the trick is? I said, what is it? He said, ask yourself, what is going to be the title, and just wait for the answer. So I was sitting there on the bar asking myself, what is going to be the title of my book? And what came to mind was Nothing You Don't Know. So I went to my editor and she said, yeah, that's not something you say in English because I'm Dutch. Then it would be Nothing You Don't Already Know. I was like, okay, let's do it. And then I had the title.
Oh my God, I enjoyed you talking about this. I mean, I enjoy listening to you talk about this. This is quite amazing and quite very lovely, really. I mean, you've got a lovely introduction into becoming a writer, a very lovely, fun, beautiful story you've got in there from making post of what you've written on IG and getting someone to say, "Oh, this is amazing. It would be great for you to have it in book format. If you have a book, I'm gonna buy it." And to you printing it out and saying, "Okay, this is gonna make a very good book, really," and compiling them, structuring it together. And a part of you meeting someone in the restaurant, exchange your contact, he gave you his book, and you read it, and you're able to learn from it in terms of structuring and even the name
Yeah.
title. I need to say this is quite very exciting, really. You've got a lovely, quite beautiful, and quite fun way into becoming a writer. Sounds to me like a lovely introduction into becoming an author. Thank you so much for sharing. And I so much enjoy you talking about it. And I think I also find a bit of your story to be quite resonating. Yeah, with mine too. So thank you for sharing. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Yeah. And in your opinion, Alessandra, I would like to ask you, what is missing in modern society, according to you? I just want to hear your take on this. What do you think is missing currently in modern society?
Well, what I see, and this is something, I'm quite a sensitive person, so I sense a lot of things, especially within myself, but also around me.
Mm,
And if I would look around, what I see, if you just look at the numbers, I mean, there's like, especially in my country, in the Netherlands, there's a burnout
mm,
problem. Many people burnout, depression is on the rise, loneliness, I think even suicide among young people.
uh,
So there's clearly something going on right there, right? Um, and there are many people today that are investigating like what is really going on here. And we have a lot of these crises like climate change, increase of political polarization,
yeah,
burnout, and all these. And the question is, are these separate phenomenon or are they symptoms of a deeper underlying crisis? And if you ask me, it's the latter. And there are many people these days investigating that. One of them is, for example, John Vervaeke, a cognitive scientist and philosopher in Canada, who
yeah,
calls it the meaning crisis, a crisis of meaning, especially in the Western world. And there's a sociologist called Hartmut Rosa, whose work I'm very inspired by, who says there's a problem of alienation.
mm,
We are disconnected from each other, from ourselves. Another inspiration source of inspiration to me has been Ian McGilchrist's work, who
mm,
studied the brain and said that there's an over-dominant left hemisphere of the brain that kind of
mm,
dehumanizes everything. It turns everything
absolutely,
into an object. And if you ask me what is underneath this,
yeah,
at the heart of this crisis, is a crisis of relationship.
mm,
And what I mean by that is we forgot how to relate to ourselves, to one another, to the planet, to the divine, however you like to call it. But I think fundamentally there's a problem of disconnect or
mm.
alienation, not knowing ourselves, not knowing who we are on the deepest level, and also not knowing how to connect with people on a deeper level and
Wow,
the world in general. That's what I think that's the main inspiration for me to write, especially my second book, Finding What Was Never Lost.
oh
It's
wow,
about restoring that sense of connectedness with yourself and with other people. And this is also something that's my own personal journey because I am also a product of modern society. I've been wrestling with this alienation, with disconnect. So a lot of my writing is actually my own personal exploration about this, call it the meaning crisis or meta crisis, if you like.
wow. This is quite very exciting. I mean, I love your take on this, and I can go on and on and on and on and on with it. Thank you so much for sharing. Sounds to be quite amazing and quite lovely. And now I love us to go back to Nothing You Don't Already Know. For readers who haven't read the book yet, and of course without giving much information away, did we have a sneak of what we'd expect in terms of themes and subject lines, speaking up nothing you don't already know? And if you have a copy of the book, then I'd like you to show to the camera just so we see what it looks
Got
like.
it here.
beautiful cover you've got in there. I love the simplicity, the white on top, the black underneath, and the name title. Quite beautiful.
Thank you. So a sneak peek. I think nothing you don't already know has kind of a double meaning in the sense that it was already published on Instagram, the most of the text. So in that sense, it was to my followers, it was nothing you don't already know.
Mm,
However, on a more deeper level, it's often the case that when you learn some profound truths about yourself, it's not as if you learn something new. It's as if something is being unveiled to you that you've always known,
yeah.
but perhaps you weren't aware that you knew it. So in
Mm,
that sense, that may be the more deeper meaning of it. But what I find that most people who enjoy my first book are people who are struggling with a sense of meaning. Like, what is the meaning of my life? Not the
mm,
meaning of life in general, because that's a very broad and big question. But
yeah.
more for me personally in my life. Like, what is it? What is it about? How do I find a sense of meaning? How do I live my life? And all of this is based on my own journey and my own questions that I was asking. So in
Mm,
that sense, again, it's a personal exploration. And what I like about it, recently, or not so recently, a while ago, someone made a post on TikTok calling this book, said about this book, this is a book everyone in their 20s should read. And I kind of understand because I wrote most of this in my late 20s. So I can understand that it resonates
wow.
a lot with people in their 20s, beginning of 30s.
Wow.
And then my second book probably is, now I'm 39, so it's probably for people in the mid 30s, Different questions, different questions.
Wow. That's quite exciting, really. And I love the fact that you mentioned the age at which you wrote those books. Quite fun to me. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. And you have another book in the name of Finding What Was Never Lost, a pocket guide for spiritual insight and inspiration. Would you like to tell us a bit about the making of that as well? Plus, I must mention the fact that your title is are quite compelling and uncommon, and I love
Can I ask you, what do you, if you hear the title Finding What Was Never Lost, what does it make you think about?
finding what was never lost. I mean, perhaps you're roaming about looking for something that it's right close to you, or you're just roaming about looking for something that is close to you, something that is not far fetched away. Finding what
Hmm.
was never lost.
Exactly.
Oh,
Perfect. So this is exactly what my teacher taught me in some sense. In 2016, I met my spiritual teacher. It was quite profound because what happened is, at the time I just quit my job, a relationship ended, and I was like, I want to work for myself, but I don't know where to go. And I had a bit of a crisis, a personal crisis. And at some point, I realized, you know what? Actually, I only have people around me of my own age group. And if I look closely, everyone is in the same struggle. Like, who am I? What should I do? What's important?
mm,
So no one could really help me. So I was like, you know what? I need older people in my life, people who have been through this struggle, who can guide me a little bit. So at that evening, I remember laying in bed and I kind of prayed, like, hey, I need a mentor. 3 or 4 days later, I was in the Vondelpark. It's a park here in Amsterdam. I was sitting there with a friend and I saw a man sitting there on his own. And he had a smile on his face. And I could just see that he knew things I didn't know yet. And my intuition said, talk to him. And my
oh,
ego said, no,
interesting. I
no,
love
no,
that.
don't do it. And at some point, when my friend left, I just went to this guy. I said, "Hey, would you like to have another tea or something?" He said, "Oh, that would be wonderful." So we started talking, and it turned out that he was on a spiritual journey for 40 years, and he was very at peace with himself, even though he was near the end of his life. He had cancer, but there was a sense of peace about him that attracted me to him.
Wow.
And he became my teacher for 4 years until he passed away. And
Oh,
almost weekly, we started chatting, sometimes for hours. And he always encouraged me. He said, Alex, you're looking for something that's closer to you than you can ever think.
mm,
And I never understood what he was talking about. I said, what are you talking about? And then he said, don't search for what is lost. Search for that which is never lost, which is always present. And of course, I didn't know what he was talking about. And slowly but surely, and after his passing, first I started intellectually understanding it from reading all the spiritual texts, exploring the great wisdom traditions, East and West. But then at some point in the meditation, deep meditation retreats, it started dawning on me like it was right here. It's a sense of being at one with yourself and the world, a sense of peace, a sense of connectedness,
Mm.
that was never lost. And I remember sitting in this meditation retreat, and then the title Finding What Was Never Lost came about. And I was like, that's the title of my second book. I know it.
Mm.
And then I started writing about all these, yeah, insights that got me to this point. And
Wow.
um, and people call it different names. There are so many different names for what is it that which is never lost. Some people call it the grace of God. Some people call it peace. I sometimes
Wow.
call it home with a capital H, like the eternal home that's ever present.
Wow. I need to say that I'm quite intrigued, really, to get to know how all of these things come to be, and the fact that you could meet random people and have a conversation with them and be able to learn something from them. It's actually something that's quite exciting, really. And I love you, I love the sound of your books as well. I love the spiritual qualities you've got in there, and I think it has a bit of philosophy as well.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think what's important, I think that is also part of my journey to be able to follow that impulse of intuition. I think this is
Absolutely.
something that gets lost also in society, especially people that work full time in a company that's all dominated by the head, by rationality and thinking. There's little room left for following these little impulses, these little whispers that are speaking to you, that are calling you. And that's also a part of my philosophy, I would say, to create space in your life to listen, really become really silent so that you can listen to this. I would say, inspired by the poet Rumi, it's this little voice that uses no words. It's like a small impulse that could be like, hey, go to this coffee shop and drink a coffee, or hey, talk to this person. And just follow these little impulses. These are, I think, it's a soul that is calling you. And this is something that I find in my work very important. And that runs as a red thread across my own personal story, I guess, and also through my work.
Wow. That's
And that
something.
doesn't mean you should lose your head, though. It's I always say follow your heart, but also use your head.
Yeah. I like the fact that you mentioned that. Thank you so much for sharing. And now, Alessandra, one of the most interesting things to me as a writer is to listen to readers' feedbacks. And you may want to
Hmm.
agree with me that one of the things that makes literature to be quite complex in its entirety is the fact that it can be interpreted in different ways by different readers based on their opinions. And sometimes some readers might get the message intended by the author correctly, and sometimes they might be close to getting the message intended by the author. Sometimes it might be far, several miles or kilometers away from getting the message, and most times they might hilariously misunderstand the message and interpret the book upside down. And as
Hmm.
interestingly fun as this sound, I would like to ask you, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently than you intended? How does that make you feel?
That's a very interesting question because this happens a lot, especially when you try to explore very deep existential themes in your
Uh,
work. And especially when it comes to spiritual ideas, you can't express them in words. The only thing words can do is kind of hint at them or point towards them. But
Absolutely.
when people start, there's a famous phrase that the Buddhists use that say, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. So all these spiritual scriptures, they're like fingers pointing to the moon, but they're not the moon. So sometimes people start criticizing the finger, this is the wrong finger, but not getting the message that it's about, once you see the moon, you no longer need the finger. So that's where it sometimes goes wrong. It's
Wow.
like we criticize like religious texts, for example. This cannot be true. This is they take it too literal,
Mm,
rather than seeing what does it hint at, what is it pointing towards. Or the other thing is that you write something from a certain perspective, and someone from a different perspective looks at it quite differently. So they can lead to very interesting things. So sometimes people interpret the sentence I wrote in a very than I thought. And I was like, this is actually a nice way of putting it. I've also noticed sometimes that people use words, my text, in a way that I shouldn't use it. So to give
mm,
you an example, I think one of the phrases that went most viral, if that's the correct way of saying it, is a quote that I wrote in my first books that said, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the
oh,
flower.
wow.
Now, my initial meaning was that it's very important to set up your environment in such a way that it enhances your growth, your well-being. Also, from a leadership perspective, you set up your organization, your culture in such a way that people can thrive. That's how I initially meant it. But at some point, people started using this quote as a way of blaming the world. It's not my fault. It's the world's fault that I'm like this. And that's not how I intended it. So that's how it, I can understand that it leads to that, but that was not how I intended this quote. So that's what also sometimes can happen. But I take that to myself and I was like, maybe I should have. So now I wouldn't phrase that in the same way anymore because now I become a bit mature. As more mature, I hope. I no longer make such a strong separation between me and the environment. I think everything is so intricately connected
Yeah.
that what I do has an impact on the environment, what happens in the environment has an impact on me, and there's this flow of information going back and forth. So in that sense, I influence my environment and it envires me. I create systems and those systems create me. It's a two-way street, so to speak.
I
So
love
these are
that.
some examples of how that works. Yeah.
I love your quote about when a flower doesn't bloom, you set the environment right for it to grow. That's very impressive and very, very amazing. Something that is worth pondering on, something worth thinking about, and something worth debating and deliberating on. Thank you so much for sharing. And I wanted to diversify a bit now into the topic of personal growth and spiritual growth. What does personal or spiritual growth mean to you? And how do you find inner peace?
Those are big questions. I think they overlap a lot, personal and spiritual growth. But if I have to make a distinction, I
Yeah,
don't like to separate. I like to make distinctions because I don't think things are fundamentally separated, but they're you
uh,
can distinguish. And I
absolutely.
would say that personal growth, let's look at the word person, which is derived from the Latin personare, which means to sound through.
Mm,
In ancient Greek and Roman empires, you had a lot of theaters, and in the theaters, you had a lot of masks, the smiley mask, sad mask, and they were called the personas because that were the mask where the sound of the author sounded through,
mm,
to sound through, persona. And the word person is derived from persona. It's actually, in some way, it's a mask, or you could say it's the interface between my being and the outside world.
yeah,
And what we do during our lives is we create several personas, like ways in which we want to be seen by the world. We create this ego. And Carl Jung said it beautifully. He said, the first half of life is creating a healthy ego, and then the second half of life is letting it all go. And in some way, I think personal growth is about having a healthy sense of personality. It's more about personality development. And I
yeah,
think the work we do in the world, the best fruits of our work, our labor, to um, is the person we become in some sense. That is, I would say, personal growth is in some sense also about growing up, making
uh,
something of yourself in a healthy manner. Then
abs-
spiritual growth, I would say, is about waking up rather than growing up. Waking up is seeing through the illusion of the person. I am not the person. I do have a personality, like a vehicle through which my sound sounds true, but I am not this personality. So I think spirituality is about expanding, have a more expanded sense of self beyond the ego and experiencing my fundamental sense of connectedness with everyone else
uh,
to that which is bigger than I am, to that which I relate to. And this is, I think, also one of the elements that's so missing in the modern world. So many people are searching for meaning, but they're searching for this spiritual domain in some sense. Not all of them, but many are that I speak to at least.
mm,
So you could say that spiritual growth is about, in some way, it's about reconnecting and restoring our sense of wholeness that we lost.
mm,
Because when we grow up, this is one way of looking at it. When we grow up in a family, this happens to everyone. There are things that are welcome in the household, there are things that are not welcome
yeah,
based on your parents' conditioning, the society. So what we do is we start pushing away parts of ourselves that are not welcome, that we don't like. And actually, we then create a kind of a split. We split ourselves off. And one of my teachers said, we survive by splitting off, but we thrive by restoring the polarities. So that means that a
Wow.
big part of this growth is to go back inside ourselves and say, hey, where did I split off a part of myself? And then bring that back. In my book, I talk about remembering your neglected members, the parts of yourself that you've pushed away, that you've pushed into the shadow. How can you reconnect with them and become whole again? I think that's where personal and spiritual growth kind of
Oh,
match or
yeah.
kind of come together in some way.
Oh,
And
wow.
this can be a lifelong journey.
I love your answers to these questions. They are quite educative. They are quite didactic, they are quite inspiring, they're quite wholesome, very heavy to digest, and I love it wholeheartedly. I like the fact that you mentioned waking up rather than growing up being your definition of spiritual growth. That's a very strong, very important, I mean, it's an amazing statement. I'm
I
a
mean, they
huge fan.
overlap a little bit, I would say, and I got this distinction from one of my source of inspiration, Ken Wilber. He's also an author who writes about this, and I think he was the first who made that distinction.
Oh,
So I
wow.
kind of like that.
An amazing one. Love it. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. And I've always been fascinated by how authors, especially writers like yourself, craft long sentences and bring words together in a way that, whatever they're pulling together, come together to make an amazing big book eventually. And before I proceed, I'd like you to show a copy of the second book to the camera, just so we see what it looks like.
It's
Yeah,
here, Finding What Was Never Lost.
aside from what we've mentioned so far, I'd like to ask you,
And
oh, exactly. Yeah.
it's written in the same way as my Instagram page. It's a quote that kind of makes you think, or at least I hope. And then it has a context or an explanation. So it's a book that people often use before meditation, that they just read a few pages and they contemplate on it. And that's what I also like. I have some of these books myself that I just use for contemplation or meditation. So I wanted to. They always say write the book that you want to read. So that's what I did.
I love that. I love that thing. Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask
Welcome.
you, apart from the books we've mentioned so far, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
I'm working on a third book.
Wow.
At least I have a. It's always interesting. I just write, and then later on, I understand like the the process I'm in. And what I want to do is I'm going to write a book that speaks about if you go into society. I speak to a lot of students, for example. I do a lot of guest lectures,
Mm.
and they always feel, most of the students, like I need to become something. We always ask children like, what do you want to become when you grow up?
Grew up.
And then we get this obsession with personal identity, as if our identity depends on what we've done or what we have or what we can. And I think that is not healthy, because what you truly are is beyond what you can, what you do, what you have. I think one of the famous sayings by Erich Fromm, who was a psychoanalyst, who said, if I am what I have and I lose what I have, who then am I? And that question I really like, and that points towards something that I'm very interested in. So, what I want to do, I'm going to write a book that is not about becoming somebody or someone or something, but it's about the act of being no one.
Wow.
And that doesn't mean being a no one, as in a loser or something, whatever you associate with that,
Yeah.
but letting go of the need to define yourself at all. And so I'm a big fan. Someone posted today that interested me is on Instagram. I saw someone posting something like, "Don't ask your children what they want to become or who they want to become, but ask them what problems do they want to solve." You see, that's about doing something without making an identity of it. And
Mm.
I see a lot of people trying to find a sense of identity in all sorts of ways. And what I've noticed in my life, and this is also a part of the spiritual journey, is to letting go of that identity, that kind of societal structures in your mind, and just be as you are without needing to define yourself in certain ways. And that, I think, is where a lot of this true happiness comes from being in the world without trying to define yourself. So in some way, I just want to write a book about the art of being no one and
Wow.
enjoying it.
I love your take on that. That is very amazing. That is quite interesting. And I love it wholeheartedly. Thank you so much for mentioning.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds like you've got sounds to me like you've got a lot actually ongoing, and I hope you find some time to sleep.
Oh yes, don't worry. I have lots of times to sleep.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Before we wrap up, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered in the process of writing your books and also ever since you got published?
Oh God, I got so many challenges still, the first book was quite interesting because I had written almost everything already just by posting it online. So all I had to do was kind of put it together. But the second book was way more challenging because I had a lot of written text already, but I really started from scratch.
Mm.
So my second book really taught me about disciplining myself. And I am one of the least disciplined people you'll ever met. I mean,
Wow.
I remember doing a big five personality test once, and one of the traits is like conscientiousness, and I scored like the bottom low edge because which means I'm not very disciplined. So I really had to discipline myself. So what I taught myself is to sit every morning from 9 to 1 and write. Just sit there and write. And even though sometimes I had no inspiration, then I was just sitting there trying, editing a little bit. And slowly but surely, the book started forming itself. So that was a challenge I had, the challenge of disciplining myself. Um, Another challenge, because I published my books myself, so I'm promoting them myself. Um I'm now in a process also of working with approaching some publishers. Um, so, for example, my first book, Nothing You Don't Already Know, is now being published in French by a French publisher, which is very nice, coming out soon. But yeah, what are some of the challenges? I think just really love writing. So everything around that, the publishing, the promoting, that's something I find challenging. I
Wow.
mean, I do everything through Instagram, and that's really nice because people follow me there for some time. They like what I put out there. But that's it. And especially of course, when I do lectures or I give inspirational talks, people can buy my book. So quite a few weeks ago, I went to the Emirates, to Sharjah, to one of the largest book fairs in the world to promote my book, which was lovely. I was invited by someone who just resonated with my text on Instagram. So these are some things that are wonderful. So there are many challenges, I think, but the main thing that I really enjoy about writing is that once you put something out there, you have no idea what's going to happen. And
Wow.
that's the adventure, I think, of writing.
Wow.
Because, people can just give you a call and say, hey, we want to have you here in this in Sharjah in this book fair. Do you want to come? And I was like, wow, adventure, let's go. So these things can happen if you put out your work. So my advice always to people who start writing
Mm.
is put your work out there. Ask for genuine feedback. See what the texts do. I put things out on Instagram, and then I see whether or not it resonates. Sometimes people ask questions. I don't know what you mean, and then I know, okay, I need to be more clear. And it's very helpful information. Yeah, just dare to put out there what you have in your heart. And I think it was Wayne Dyer, a spiritual teacher, who once said, "Don't die with the music still in you." And this is something I always encourage people to do.
Mm.
Put it out there and see
Wow.
what happens. And be teachable. Ask for feedback and dare to listen. I think that has helped me a lot in life at this stage as an author.
Wow. I love your take on that. That's a lot, and I love hearing you talk about that. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
I'd like you to give us some sort of advice, yeah? As a published author of two books, like yourself, and an impending author of another one, like you've mentioned, you have another one upcoming. But then, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still currently struggling with writing and publishing a book? And also, where exactly can interested viewers get a copy of any of your books?
I see. Well, besides that, the what I just said about just putting things out there and see how it resonates,
Mm.
I mean, that worked for me. Maybe it doesn't work for anyone. I can only speak for what served me. So another thing would be if you write about a certain topic, just make sure you really understand it. I've been exploring the world's wisdom traditions for about 12, 13 years. And I remember when I just started and I was like, wow, I read this beautiful book. Everyone should know about it. And then that's what they call the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is the effect that when you know very little about something, you think you know everything. And I remember starting writing from that place. And then only later on, when I started really finding teachers, doing deep education programs, meditate deeply, then I realized how ignorant I've actually been. So this is also something when it comes to writing about certain topics. Make sure you have good teachers. Make sure you know what you're talking about. So really dive deep into certain topics. One of my teachers once said, read more than you write. And what he meant by that is make sure you study so that you become a force for good. But I would say that's different if you really speak from the heart. If you speak about poetry and you want to you write poetry and you really want to express yourself, then I would say, because I also notice from myself, if I speak from the heart, it resonates more than when I just try to create something from my head, because it
Yeah.
usually doesn't work. And so I think that's the main advice. Really find what is it that you want to express.
Yeah.
Um, get into those feelings and welcome all the feelings you have. I think if you want to be rich as a writer or have a rich source from which you write, I think you need to have a rich emotional life as well. So
Uh,
welcome all the emotions you have. Don't run away from negative emotions. Go through them. There's one of the Sufis, I think, was it? I don't remember who it was, who said like, don't surrender your loneliness too quickly. Let it ferment like only some ingredients can. And I like that. Sometimes you have to go through things to really learn some lessons and then find the gold in there and write about it. So, yeah, if you want to come from a rich source, make sure your emotional life is as well is rich. That's maybe something that just comes to mind. That has helped me a lot in my writing.
wow. That's amazing, really. And where exactly can we get a copy of the book?
I publish them on Amazon. So the best thing is to go to Amazon or to my website, but then it will link to Amazon. And it's important to consider that if you're, for example, in the US, then Amazon.com. If you're in the UK, Amazon.co, because it doesn't automatically send you to the country you're in. So if you're in a country that doesn't have Amazon, then find one that is closest to you. Otherwise, the shipping cost will be higher. So that's something I just wanted to say. So, and people can find me on Instagram. That's where I post a lot of these posts. I write generally something twice a week that I write and then post. So that's where people can follow my work as well.
Interesting. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Alexander Den Heijer book directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on his website and also another platform. I also left a link to social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Alessandra, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say this is more than awesome, quite exciting, very great and lovely having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
It's been a pleasure, and thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, it's my pleasure as well.